In this tutorial, we will cover every single question you might have when it comes down to speedlights. What is a speedlight? What is TTL? What is manual mode? What is multi-flash mode? How to get my speedlight off camera? How to use my speedlight on camera? It's going to be a deep dive into the world of speedlights. And after this tutorial, you should be pretty confident in knowing what sort of speedlight you might want to buy, how to use a speedlight, and what the speedlight is. Let's start off with one of the biggest questions. What sort of speedlight brand should I buy? Whilst every camera manufacturer has their own branded speedlights, such as like Sony has their Sony branded speedlights, Canon has their Canon branded speedlights, and Nikon has their Nikon branded speedlights, and so on. There are alternative or third-party alternatives on the market which will cost a fraction of the original branded speedlights from your camera brand, such as like a Godox brand, newer brand, Pixapro, Adorama. Pixapro is basically the UK market version of Godox. Adorama is the American branded version of a Godox brand. There are alternatives out which will cost you a fraction of the original speedlight from your camera brand. There are also higher priced speedlights out, such as like a Profoto, but those speedlights, they easily cost $1,000 for one single speedlight, whilst you can have this Godox TT685 for roughly £120 here within the UK. So we using the Godox brand in this tutorial because this is the flash brand I'm using for my Sony cameras. Looking at the market, you have basically two different types of speedlights available, and this is your old school classic French head or square head speedlight, which still some of those flashes get powered of 4 AA batteries, and you're gonna have a round head speedlight nowadays available which is powered of lithium batteries. The main difference should be kind of obvious, and this comes down to the speedlight head. One is round, one is square. The round head speedlight is meant to give you a bit more softer light and a more even spread of light when it comes down to illuminating your subject. Whilst the square head still can give you a bit of harsher light and doesn't give you as nice widespread as the round head. But although those two flashes are the difference is a power delivery. The classic French head or square head speedlight is powered of 4 AA batteries, and the newer flashes such as like the round head speedlight is powered of a lithium battery. The main difference between those two power supplies is obviously the batteries and the lithium battery, but it also comes down to the power supply. With the lithium powered speedlight, you have a better power supply, faster burst shoot mounting when it comes down to your flash output, a better recycling time for the flash to generate the next shot compared to the old school 4 AA batteries. Those batteries recycling slower than the lithium powered batteries. And overall, when you decide, or if you would decide to go with the 4 AA batteries, make sure you buy good rechargeable batteries. This will increase and improve your experience with your flash. It will increase and improve your recycling time for the burst shoot mode, or if you wanted to shoot more frequent flash outputs out of your speedlight. But now let's actually have a bit of a closer look at our two speedlights. To the right we have a square head speedlight, and to the left we have our round head speedlights. And as we mentioned beforehand already, the difference between those two speedlights is obvious. You have your square head on the right hand side, you have a round head on the left hand side. The square head also has two features built into the head which the round head speedlight or flash does not have. But the round head speedlight has a feature which the square head doesn't have. So let's start off with the square head first. The square head has a diffusion panel and a bounce card built into the top of the head of a speedlight as well. The diffusion panel is basically meant to break down the light, spread the light a bit out, and gives you a bit more softer light when a diffusion panel is in use, but also keeping in mind you will lose a bit of power when using a diffusion panel. The bounce card is basically what the name gives it away. It bounces light forward. The feature which the round head speedlight has, which the square head doesn't have, is there is a modeling lamp built into this round head speedlight, basically, which will make it easier when you shoot at night or in dark environments. You can switch this modeling lamp on and it makes life easier for the camera to focus on your subject. If we stick to the head, both speedlights have basically an angle view grid here as well. So basically you can say you want to have your flash bent by 60 degrees and you just tilt it one stop right now from 45 to 60 degrees or 75 degrees, 90 and 105 degrees. So this is, it doesn't get used often, but let's say someone would tell you, can you bend the speedlight head to 45 degrees? You have your indication here on both flashes where you could say you can bend your speedlight head to an angle view degree as requested. And whilst we're talking about the heads of the speedlights, both speedlights feature a flexible head. So basically you can bend, tilt your speedlight head pretty much in almost any sort of direction you might need. Sometimes you might need to bend the speedlight to the left because there's a wall and you want to bounce some light off, or you want to tilt it forward and give it some direct flash towards your subject, or you might even be in a situation where you just want to bounce it upwards or even backwards. So both speedlights or speedlights in general have a very flexible head to accomplish pretty much any situation and shooting requirements you might be in. So if we're having a look, both speedlights having a battery or lithium battery compartment. With the Godox V1, we need to press this tiny little button here on the left, and then we can push the lithium battery out to the right. And with the TT685, we just need to pull this little door down and the battery is coming out already. So both flashes have on each side a battery compartment, and the batteries or the lithium battery just get inserted in different ways. Both speedlights have a USB-C Type-C port on the side to basically update the software at some point, and they both speedlights having also a sync port jack as well. This basically means you could take your speedlight, sync it up with a cable and have it wired into your camera when you trigger the speedlight. So if we're having a look at the front of both speedlights basically having a focused assist beam built into the front of a speedlight. This basically means in tricky lighting situations, the flash will decide automatically to use the assist beam lamp to help your camera focus in tricky lighting situations. However, with modern mirrorless cameras, those focus assist beam lamps don't always work, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and there's no 100% fix for it yet. One other thing which is built in here is also a slave mode. You could trigger your speedlight with your speedlight when you fire the speedlight. This needs to be in range of a speedlight, and the sensor needs to detect the flash output from the other flash to then basically realize that this flash fires, this flash needs to fire as well. So basically a slave mode where you can trigger a second speedlight without needing a trigger or a wireless trigger. There's one more feature at the front which a Godox TT685 has, which the V1 does not have. This is basically this external power support pocket. This basically means instead of using double 4A batteries, you could hook up your 685 to external power bank or battery pack from Godox and fire it over the power of a battery bank with a wired connection instead of using 4 AA batteries, which means basically better power supply, faster recycling time, and basically a very long life of battery life in general. And if we look at the back of both speedlights, they are pretty identical in our case right now. You have your display, you have your power switch on, you have your wheel you can do your adjustments with to select your modes, to select your power. You can lock your TT685 with this wheel. On a V1 you have your modeling lamp here on the wheel. You can change your zoom with this wheel. You have a power test button, your menu button. At the V1 you change or you lock your speedlight with the menu button, and then you have a connection button. You have a few more buttons here on top, which we're going to dive into as soon we're diving into the menu and into the display layout. And you basically have a reset button. So basically, if you would press those two and those two buttons at the same time, you can reset your Speedlight as well. So, and if we're looking at the display layout from those flashes, they are pretty identical. So we can put one flash to the side and focus on a display layout and how to change certain settings and what certain buttons do on your back of your display. So basically on the left hand side corner, you have your manual mode or your mode sign. At present, we're in manual mode. So if you come down to your wheel, you press the mode button once, you jump over into the next mode of a flash. This would be multi-mode. And then press it one more time, you would jump to TTL mode. If you press it one more time, you jump back into manual mode. Then next to the mode sign, we have an A sign in a square. This is basically your zoom function. Your zoom function is set currently to auto. If you wanted to change your zoom function, you need to press the zoom button at the top of a wheel, where then you can adjust your zoom function manually if you wanted to. Let's say you would shoot with a 50mm prime lens, set it to 50mm. This gives you the best coverage from a flash compared to the focal length you're shooting at. If you shoot a zoom lens, it's recommended to leave it in auto. As soon as you change the zoom from your zoom lens, the flash will automatically match the zoom function to your zoom lens to give you best coverage possible. Next to it, we're having a H sign with a little flash. This is basically your high-speed sync sign, which you can switch off and on with this button here, which says sync above. This basically indicates the flash that you want to shoot high-speed sync, that you want to use the flash up to 1/8000th of a second. So I recommend to leave it always on, so you know you're always in high-speed sync and you don't need to worry about your sync timings from your camera towards your Speedlight. Next to it is a little music box. This basically means that the beep sign is on at present, and then you have an indicator for your battery. When we're coming down here to the left side, it basically shows you that where your flash sits and what sort of angle your flash has. So basically, if you turn it up, it shows you a little arrow up that basically your flash head is bent up. And then next to it, you see the power. If you wanted to change your power, you can press here on a plus minus sign on a wheel. And then if you press down or up, you adjust the power by one stop up or down, depending if you press up or down. If you wanted to make minor adjustments like 0.1 stops, you can do this as well. Press the plus and minus button and then turn your wheel and you can adjust the flash in basically 0.1 stops. So you would shoot a power output of 132 power plus 0.7. So basically you would shoot 132 plus 3/4 full power to the next stop, if this makes sense. If you would turn it one more time, you would reach 0.8, 0.9, plus 1, you would jump to the next full stop of power. Underneath, you can also see some sort of indication from 0.5 up to 18 meters. This basically, if you have a flash mounted on top of a camera and you have your Speedlight tilted down, it gives you the indication of how far you should roughly be away from your subject to give your subject the correct exposure with your camera settings compared to your power output of your flash. Those are estimations, they are not 100% accurate, so keep this in mind, but it gives you a rough idea how far you should be away from your subject, like 2 meters, 4 meters, 9 meters. And then underneath is a TCM button. So if we're swapping the menu quickly once to TTL, let's agree this. The TCM button basically converts your TTL settings into manual settings. So if you press the TCM button, it gives you the TTL settings in manual mode, and you could do fine adjustments if you wanted to. You have a sync button, as we clarified already, and you have your slave mode where you can say slave 1, slave 2. You can hook up to 2 slaves in this sort of combination, and then use your flash to trigger this flash in slave mode if you wanted to. Another thing is you have TTL mode. TTL basically means through the lens. And this flash decides accordingly to your settings of your camera how much power output this flash should use to expose the scene correctly. You could do some exposure compensation to it as well if you are unhappy with the TTL mode, how the flash exposes your image, and you just need to press a plus and minus button and then basically do your adjustments again. Press up and down, say you want it a bit brighter, add plus 0.3 stops of light, or you want it a bit darker, minus 0.3 stops of light. Now we have covered pretty much everything you need to know from the outside of a speedlight or flash. Now we're diving a bit deeper into the menu itself, keeping in mind that the Speedlight menu is pretty similar from each brand. The idea is pretty similar as well. Certain brands just name their things or settings slightly different because it is a different brand compared to the Godox brand. So let's start off. Let's press our menu button. Let's jump into our menu. The first icon on a list of a menu is the meter or feed meter. This basically is a setting which you could change, which will change your meter readings here at the bottom of a speedlight. You have the scale from 0.5 up to 18 meters. So if you wanted to change this into feet, this is what you do with the first icon of a list of a menu. If we press this, okay, change this to feet, come back out of our menu, you can see that the 0.5 meter up to 18 meters have changed into feet. 1.7 feet up to 60 feet. I personally leave it in meter. It just works easier for me and I'm used to it. The second icon on, or the second point of your menu list is basically the AF. It's just basically your autofocus assist beam lamp. I keep this on even if we have said earlier in the video that sometimes the focus assist beam lamp does not always work with your mirrorless camera. However, I keep the setting on, so if it works, and I know it works and it's on. Elsewise, you could switch it off if you wanted to, but I do think it's a good thing to just leave it on so you don't need to worry. If you wanted to use your autofocus assist beam lamp to jump in the menu, switch it on, switch it off, switch it back on, so you can just leave it on. The next point in the menu would be the standby mode. This basically means your flash, if you don't use your flash, it will fall asleep to save battery. This usually happens after a couple of minutes. I can't give you the exact sleeping or standby time of a Godox system, but it happens after like potentially 2-3 minutes that your flash will fall asleep, your display goes black, and also your test flash button will flash green. This is an indication that your flash has fallen asleep. So you need to press once the power test button to wake up your flash so that your flash is then ready to use again. Next in the menu would be your RX standby mode. This basically can be switched between 30 to 60 seconds. This basically means that the RX or the transmitter system connection will fall asleep within 30 to 60 minutes. I have it set to 60 minutes. I never reached the 60 minutes anyway. However, this is basically just there to give your flash another safety standby mode. When it comes down to the RX transmission system, set it to 60 minutes and you're absolutely fine when it comes down to the RX standby mode. Then we're coming down to scan mode. Scan mode is basically a handy tool. So let's come over, let's switch the scan mode on, let's press start. This is basically a setting which you could use when you shoot, let's say as example, weddings. You shoot with a second photographer and you guys need a good stable channel for your flash. You could scan the surroundings, see which channels are the best channels, which gives you the most stable connection from your speedlight to your transmitter. This gives you recommendations as example channel 26, 10, 3, 31, 30, 29, 28, 8. Those channels are recommended to use to have the best stable transmission between your flash and your transmitter in busy environments. This can come in very handy when shooting weddings. And then basically after you scanned your channel and you say, oh, I'm taking channel 26, you come basically down to your next icon on a list. And then you can basically set your channel to channel number 26, which is the flash recommended to use for the most stable connection between your transmitter and your speedlight, with the most little interference of other electric devices around your speedlight. And then on your next icon would be the ID icon. This is basically also a setting which can illuminate your setting of your flash to give you the most stable connection when shooting in busy environments. Let's say you would shoot an event and there are several different photographers all using the same Godox brand as their flash system. You could set a custom ID number for your flash and your transmitter to have then a custom stable connection between your flash and your transmitter. And if you talk to the other guys to say, okay, I'm using ID 18, the next person uses ID 25, and the next person uses ID 35, you all have your separate channel and illumination, so you shouldn't have any interference when it comes down to your flash usage. Then next on the list is basically your beep sound. This basically tells the flash to beep when it's soon ready to fire again. I leave it on, I take it off sometimes. It's a bit depends on in which sort of environment you shoot. Let's say you would shoot a wedding inside the church. Then it's maybe a good thing to take this setting off and set your flash to silent. Other occasion you want to keep it on. It's basically a setting which indicates when you shot your flash, which beeps that you literally shoot your flash, and when it's ready it will re-beep to tell you the flash is ready for the next shot or the next flash outburst. And another setting would be the light settings. This is basically for your display. You can set it to on, off, or even 12 seconds. After 12 seconds your display will go dark to save some battery. You can set it off so your display will never light up, or you keep it on. I personally always keep it on. It's the easiest, my flash is always illuminated and I can see my settings the best when the light or display is on. Same with the display LCD setting. Last, you can adjust the brightness of your LCD as well. +1, +2, +3, and that's the same downward. So basically you can adjust the brightness of your display as well. So now we covered the basics of a flash when it comes down to layout, how a speedlight head reacts or what you can do with it, how the menu works, and now we're diving into the actual modes of a flash. There are basically 3 flash modes most of the flashes nowadays will provide. That's manual mode, TTL mode and multi-flash mode. While certain brands such as like a Canon Speedlight, they have also I-TTL or offer I-TTL, which is kind of similar to TTL. However, the majority of flashes from Godox, they offer manual, TTL and multi-flash mode. So what is manual mode? Manual mode, as the name gives it away, you need to manually put your speedlight power into the speedlight to expose the scene correctly you want to photograph. This means basically you set your exposure settings within a camera and then manually you tell the flash how much power you would like to add to expose the scene. Let's say you would shoot the ISO 100 f2.8 by 125th of a second as an example, and you manually put into the flash how much power you would like to add. Let's say full power, half power, a third power, 1/116th of a power, or even as little as 1/128th of power. This is manual mode. You need to decide manually how much power the flash needs to provide to expose the scene properly. This means also when shooting manual mode that you need to take a few test shots with your flash and your flash power to make sure you have a right flash power to expose your scene correctly. This is a bit of test and trial sometimes, because sometimes you need to test out, do I need 1/116th of a power, do I need half a power, or do I need full power of a flash? As more you shoot manual mode, as more you get used to your settings, as more your guessing of flash power will be more accurate. It's a test and trial sometimes with manual mode, but as more you do it, as more you get used to it. What is TTL mode? TTL basically stands for through the lens, and this is an automated program from your flash where your flash automatically adds enough flash power towards your given camera settings to expose the scene properly. So basically it's exactly the same process. You decide what sort of camera settings you would like to use. As an example again, ISO 100, f2.8, 1/125th of a second, but this time the flash will automatically read your meter readings through the lens and then decides how much power the flash needs to provide to expose the scene correctly. This can come in very handy if you do a lot of run and gun shooting, because you can set your ambient scene within a camera. Your camera decides what sort of settings are for the ambient scene, and the flash exposes everything else in front of the lens. So very handy if you do a lot of run and gun shooting, or you are not used to it yet and you rather use the TTL mode to get used to the flash and how the flash reacts. But then also if the TTL function wouldn't be to your likings, as an example, the flash overexposed the scene or underexposed the scene, you can do some flash compensation and add a bit light or take a bit light away or power from a flash and give the scene a bit more of your taste. So TTL is for simple, easy run and gun shooting. Your flash decides how much flash power the flash needs to provide to expose the scene correctly. And with the flash compensation, you can either brighten the scene or darken the scene as well, depending on your liking. What is I-TTL or even I-TTL for the Nikon brand as an example? I-TTL is kind of similar to TTL. The only difference is that when using a Canon brand as an example and you're using I-TTL, you're having a pre-flash to meter the scene and the exposure, and then a flash decides how much power it needs to add to the scene to expose the scene correctly. And with the TTL function is basically the flash reads the scene directly through the lens and then decides how much power the flash needs to provide to expose the scene correctly. So basically in easy terms right now, because I'm getting confused here as well, I-TTL is using a pre-flash to determine how much power the flash needs to expose the scene correctly, and TTL meters your meter readings through the lens to decide how much flash power it needs to add to expose the scene correctly. Both ways are kind of similar and should give you similar results. However, the majority of flashes from Godox as an example, they offer only TTL and it will do the job just fine. And the last mode is basically multi-mode. I'm not a big user of multi-mode. Basically what multi-mode does is you still set your power, flash power output, and then you take several different flashes in a certain frequency to create certain effects. I'm not a big multi-flash user, so I don't want to dive too much into this sort of topic here right now, but multi-flash mode is basically you shoot several different flashes in a certain combination to create a certain light pattern or light flash pattern to create a certain image. And if we're just having a look here right now, multi-mode, 1/128th of a second, 16 times by 8 Hertz. This is how it would look like. It shoots a lot of burst modes in a certain frequency to create or be able to create certain images. What is high-speed sync? High-speed sync is basically a flash function which will let you exceed the camera sync speed towards your flash. So let's start off with what is the sync speed of your camera. Most modern cameras have a flash sync speed of 1/250th of a second or up to 1/250th of a second. While there are exceptions, I think the Sony A9 Mark III got a flash sync speed up to 80 thousandths of a second, but the majority of camera bodies, they clock out by 1/250th of a second. This means when you use the flash, after this sync speed of 1/250th of a second, you will get black lines through your image. While the Sony cameras, they have a feature built in. They don't let you go over 250th of a second sync speed unless you actually switch on the high-speed sync function within your flash. This will prevent basically that when you're out and you would go over 250th of a second, to avoid those black lines, to make sure that you always get a proper exposed picture or a fully exposed picture. So what are the benefits of high-speed sync, or what are even the downsides of high-speed sync? High-speed sync can be quite handy when you shoot outdoors and you want to shoot, let's say, a wide aperture, a f1.8 aperture, but you need to bump up your shutter speed to 1/8,000th of a second. You have your ISO at 100 because it is a nice sunny day. Then it is very handy to have a high-speed sync which can capture the flash at a high shutter speed of 1/8,000th of a second. Fantastic. The downside of high-speed sync is, as higher your shutter speed is and as faster you want to shoot, as more power you will lose from a flash. This means you might need to move the flash closer to your subject, because as faster your shutter speed is, as more power you will lose from a flash as well. So by now you should have a good understanding what sort of speedlight brands are available, what sort of speedlight types are available, how the menu works, how the button layout is, what is manual mode, what is TTL mode, what is multi-mode. Now it's time to actually get our speedlight on camera, off camera, use it as a slave, or even use it as a master trigger. So without further saying, let's dive into the last section of this tutorial. So now we want to get our speedlight on camera, and that's pretty straightforward. Make sure you got your camera, a matching speedlight mount for your camera, and then basically just push the speedlight into the hot shoe mount. Use the lock mechanism to lock it up, to tighten it up so your speedlight won't fall out. A small little tip here is leave both devices off, your speedlight and your camera, for the simple reason, if you would have both devices or your camera and your speedlight on, you have magnetic or electricity pins down in a hot shoe which gonna rub on each other when there's electricity. So you might have a chance of damaging your camera electricity wise, or get electricity damage. So always recommended connect speedlight and camera before you switch speedlight and camera on. And then technically you should be able to fire the flash without any issues. And then basically you decide which mode you want to use, as we have discussed earlier in a video. If you're a beginner or you're completely new to the flash photography, then start off with TTL and you're basically good to go. Before we're doing anything else, you might actually want to jump into your flash menu from your camera brand. As mentioned before in a video, every single brand names things slightly different, brand specific. But if we're talking about the Sony Alpha 7 Mark IV, my flash settings, I leave my flash mode on fill flash. This gives me the best coverage. So basically what happens, when you press the shutter button, your shutter opens, your flash will fire, and then your shutter will close. This will give you the best coverage, and this will also freeze the action. You could also set your flash menu to like a slow sync or even to a rare sync. With the rare sync as an example, your shutter will open, and then before the shutter closes, your flash will fire, and fires with the sync of a shutter when a shutter closes. So basically second curtain shutter in other camera brands menus. So I leave it mostly on fill flash for portrait photography or even just general flash photography. The flash will fire when a shutter is wide open to give me my exposure and then closes again. Then a flash compensation I leave on 0, and I make flash exposure compensation within a flash. If I would shoot TTL manually mode, you do your own adjustments anyway. And then exposure compensation setting, if you use a live view on your display, if you have it set to ambient flash, it will give you overall exposure, how the image could look like when using flash. So if you want purely the ambient exposure, you need to set it to ambient only, and then it gives you the ambient exposure on a live preview without the flash. And that are basically most settings I have changed within a Sony Alpha 7 Mark IV. When it comes down to flash menu, I use my flashes mainly on manual mode. So I do all my adjustments myself anyway. And then like red eye reduction, I do all in Photoshop or in post if needs to be. And then yeah, that's pretty much my camera flash menu settings for the Sony Alpha 7 Mark IV. So let's say you would like to use your on-camera flash as a master. You bought a second Speedlight, which then gets triggered with the on-camera Speedlight. So if you want to do so, you need to press this right-hand side button here with the zigzag storm sign and jump onto the next page. The next page is kind of similar to the first pages. The difference is here is like a Wi-Fi signal sign, and then you have 4 different flash layouts here at the bottom or in the middle of a display, which indicates an M flash. This is basically your master. This is the master flash, which sits on top of the camera, and then you can add 3 additional flashes to it as well. So make sure you're in high-speed sync as well, so you don't never need to worry about your shutter's sync speed. And then let's switch on the second flash. To be able to trigger the second flash with the master flash, we need to change a few settings on this one. Click the right-hand side button with the zigzag storm sign again, and then make sure that your display shows orange. This basically means your transition system or transmitter system is active. This flash will receive your commands from a master flash. 2 things we might want to check: that we are in a right mode. So when your display shows orange, that's the right mode. This is what you need for the RX transmission system to work. Also, your flashes will struggle if they're too close together to fire, because it's just too close from a transition and the interference is too big that this flash actually will receive commands from a master flash. Also make sure that you're always in the same channel, that you communicate to the flashes as well. And then setting your flashes. The master flash we can leave off, or we can even switch a master flash on. That's depending on a situation. If you wanted to switch a master flash on whilst using the master flash to trigger this flash, but at the same time using a master flash to expose for a person in front of your lens, you can press this M button and then basically decide which sort of mode you want to use, manual, TTL, or leave it off. And then basically make sure that your second flash has the right channel and the right flash name as well. In this case, we have both flashes set to channel 21. That's my A flash. My A flash is set currently to manual with 1/8 power. So let's move this one a tiny bit away. And then we can basically fire both flashes at the same time. Let's move this a bit back in. So you can watch the green light when a flash fires and reloads basically. So now you basically can fire both flashes at the same time, use your on-camera Speedlight as a master. If you didn't want to use this flash and purely use it as a transmitter, then just switch the M mode off, and this basically acts purely as a transmitter now, and you fire your other flash. So let's pretend for a second this is a different brand of flash, and you using the Godox system, and let's say this is a Nikon, Canon, Sony brand, whatever it might be. But you still would like to use this flash in the background whilst using your original flash on top of your camera. This is possible as well. You need to jump into your flash, set it to slave mode, and set the desired power output or input, depending on your scene you're shooting at. And then basically you just need to take your flash and move your flash somewhere in the background. Here we go. And then basically fire your camera with your main flash and trigger the second Speedlight with your main Speedlight. So basically what happens is, as soon as this flash fires, the sensor and the slave mode, which is built into your Speedlight, will realize this flash fires and then fires as well. So this is a way where you can incorporate several different brands of Speedlights into your current system. You don't have much control over the Speedlight in the back. You always need to do some sort of adjustments, but if you would need the second Speedlight in a certain moment, you have set your power output, you still could trigger a different brand with the Godox brand or any brand, as long as it's set to slave mode and it's visible for the sensor that you fire a flash, that the second Speedlight knows to fire as well. So let's assume at some point you would like to get your flash off camera, and then you need to trigger for your camera brand. There are different sort of triggers out. I'm using an X Pro trigger where I can have basically 2, 4, 5 different speedlights or flashes hooked up to this trigger at some point. Those triggers are from a layout and from a menu system pretty similar to the layout and system or menu system of your speedlight. So all you need to do basically is get your trigger onto your camera. Make sure that both of your devices are in the same channel again. We're using channel 1 on both devices, on your speedlight and your trigger. Make sure that your speedlight is set to transmission system to receive basically the controls from your trigger. And then basically you can trigger your speedlight off camera or even take a picture, and at some point I should switch the camera on. And then basically your flash fires with the commands of a trigger. The trigger is pretty similar to the general layout and system and menu system of your speedlight. You can adjust your power. When you click here on this button, you can change the power in full stops, in one stops or 0.1 stops. So it's pretty straightforward and easy to use as well. Just make sure that your channels are the same, that you have set the correct flash to your correct namings, so you always know which flash is which. And then basically you just can move your speedlight around again and trigger the flash off camera with your trigger. And then there is the last part of this tutorial, basically speedlight accessories. You can have a bunch of different speedlight accessories. Some of them are magnetic, like this one, like this light dome you can slap onto your square head if you wanted to. If you wanted to get your camera or your speedlight at some point off camera, you probably want a light stand, a soft box and a bones mount bracket. The round head speedlights, such as like a Godox V1, they have a magnetic ring built into the top of the speedlight. So you can attach magnetic accessories to the round speedlight. For the square speedlight head, you can have also a bunch of different accessories. It all comes down to later on what you want to do with your speedlight, what's your desired scenarios you want to shoot, and then you basically build your kit around this. And with that said, today guys, I hope you liked this video. It was quite into detail and it's a very long video, but I hope it was helpful to you. If it was, like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff. And yeah, with that said, I'm gonna see you in the next one. Cheers, mate. Here's one thing I actually forgot about earlier in the video. If you wanted to change the zoom function from your old square head speedlight and it seems to be stuck on 14mm and you can't work out why this won't change, this is because you haven't pushed in your diffusion panel and your bounce card properly. So always make sure when you take out your bounce card and the diffusion panel, put it proper back so you actually never get your zoom function stuck. If it's stuck on 14mm, you don't know why, press it in and this will solve your problem.